Okay, so a good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this BioWednesday webinar on the topic is the workplace the best place to train the future workforce? So actually, when we were planning this session, it was kind of seen as our back to school in keeping with the time of year, but also this is a topic which strongly reflects the work that One Nucleus does to support the development of talent in the sector. So we have sort of many initiatives and activities in this area. I'm sure many of you have received our People Pathways newsletter. We're now frequently running our Employer of Choice sessions. And of course, this year we ran our first Building Life Science Adventures Careers Conference, and that'll also be running next year as well in March. So collectively, we'd like to do a lot of activities to highlight awareness of the development of talent. So this is just one of those sessions which really feeds nicely into that. So the format of the session today is going to be 1 hour. We've got a lot to fit in. So I'm shortly going to hand to Paul Branthwaite from Transcript, who will be our moderator for today's session. Paul's going to do a very brief scene setter, covering some of the silos in the pharma and biotech landscape. And then we're going to launch straight into the panel discussion, and then we'll hear an introduction from each of our panelists. So just a very brief word on logistics. We've all been on many of these sessions by now. So if you can kindly remain muted whilst the panel are discussing, and then the chat box, as always, is enabled. We do very much welcome your comments, your questions. Please feel free to share your own experiences. If you want to drop contact details in there, it's all very welcome. We've tried, like normal, to reserve some time for Q&A. So we can do that more towards the end of the panel discussion. And then, as you'd heard, we are recording the session. So we will be featuring this as part of the on-demand content on the One Nucleus website afterwards. So with that, Paul, I think I'm going to let you take the stage. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. If you could bung the slides up, that would be useful. Technical term, apologies. And maximize, fine. So the topic obviously is clear. We're looking at where can we continue throughout a career the opportunity to train. And the question was, is the workplace the obvious or only place to train our future workshops? And I wanted to take this in the context of both a reduction in opportunity, but also an increased number of opportunities to do that training, how we cost it, where we do it, etc., because I think it's a given that careers morph and training as part of that evolution. So I'm going to first off, next slide, please, Alicia. I'm going to do some introductions. I will give you, as Alicia said, a brief information in terms of the background for people. Some of that is very much focused on people who are new to the industry, to give you a scale of the opportunity which will be available for you later. It's not to teach the obviously those who are experienced in the industry about what's what, but it does reflect some of the historical changes in terms of where people have been getting their training from. And then we'll go into the questions to the panelists, and hopefully there will be some questions from the audience for us to get our teeth into in the end. And I hope to be able to sum it up in a sort of brief synopsis towards the end. So first slide. I'll start because I'm the moderator, and it will be brief. I'm a senior partner at Transcript. We're a drug development house. Many of you in the audience will have come across me or my organization over time. I'm a pharmacologist. I've had essentially 5 careers in the industry. So one of the things that I have been party to is continuous changes of knowledge, simply because I needed that for the changes of direction I took. Jackie, many of you have met. Melanie Renos is he calls himself a senior lecturer, but he is a serial entrepreneur. And Zoe kindly is going to stand in as our person who's starting a career, so we get that perspective as well. So, Jackie, do you want to give us a synopsis of yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. So my role is the Head of Early Careers in Research and Development at AstraZeneca. So it's a relatively new role and a relatively new team. We've been together since early 2020. And really collectively, we look after all of the large centrally run early career programs in research and development. So that's the postdoctoral researchers, apprentices, graduates, PhD students, and increasingly placement students as well.
Melanie.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everybody. So I'm Melanie James. I am a partner at law firm Mills and Reeve. I'm based in our Cambridge office. So in the hub of the ecosystem, if you like, being in Cambridge. So my specialism is employment and HR law. I confess I'm not a scientist by background, purely legal background. A large part of my practice involves advising employers that do operate within the life sciences sector, big and small, national, international, you name it. I've probably had a hand in it. On the sort of, as well as the advisory stuff, I do a large part of what I do actually is training, going into client organisations and doing training and development. Not so much with sort of graduate or entry-level positions, but more management and leadership training. So that's the sort of lens that I'm coming at through today.
Thank you. Renos.
Hi, I'm Renos Sava. As Paul alluded, I am a senior lecturer, but let me tell you why I'm here today. I am a scientist by background, but I suppose I'm here today because around a bit more than 20 years ago, I founded a company that many people know well even today, DomainX. Back then, I was hiring into what was a brand new startup scientist and also business positions. Since then, I've been the program director of an MSc program at Birkbeck called BioWednesday, and therefore I see people wanting to get a career in the life sciences sector in many different parts of the ecosystem. I'm sure Paul will be outlining that in detail. And very much further back in my own career, I was exasperated by how many different things, how many different people it seemed you needed to know just to get a job. I think the picture's a lot better today. I hope you're going to enjoy this discussion. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Renos. And finally, but not least, Zoe.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, hi. So I'm Zoe. I'm an analyst at Costello Medical currently and have been permanent there since July. So I've not been in the job that long, really. But I kind of got the job through completing an internship with them from January this year until July. So it's a 6-month internship. And through that kind of experience and the knowledge I gained through that, I was able to gain the permanent position. And then prior to that, so I finished my degree at Bristol doing chemistry last year. And during that time, I did a placement at Cancer Research UK in the science policy department. And it was that experience as well, which kind of made me think about looking into the field of medical communications, which is what Costello Medical does primarily. And so, yeah, without these experiences I've had, I don't think I would have known which area I kind of wanted to go into. So I think that's the kind of angle I'm coming from today, to show you what I've learned from completing internships and work experience.
Thank you, Zoe. Can we have the first background slide? So what I'm trying to show here, and there are a couple of follow-ups, and it's not supposed to be fully comprehensive, etc. But it was to try and give historical context to where training was done and what's happening now. So historically, people came out of academia. They went into big pharma, and big pharma trained them, root and branch. And obviously there are some still exemplars of that, and AstraZeneca obviously are one. But as the rise of the biotechs or SMEs, small medium enterprises, came into play, they had less capability to do that in-house. We also had the big rise of the contract organizations, so contract research organizations, contract manufacturing, contract regulatory, all the rest of that stuff. And they have taken on some of that element of training for people who are new in the industry. And generic companies, by and large, and these are companies for the uninitiated who essentially take off patented drugs and make them cheaply, which keeps overall drug costs down. But they also have some role in terms of what they're trying to achieve, which in another slide or so, you'll see where I'm going with that. And now we've had the birth of what we call virtual companies, where essentially you have a bunch of money, a central management organization, and they outsource all of the bits and pieces that used to be part of an integrated big pharma drug development and selling system. And that is still evolving. And so whether they will be able to take on some of these training, etc., the jury is out. But just to put it in context, some of the areas that you might be interested in if you're new into the industry, like getting into basic research, that has become less apparent in big pharma, still obviously done in small, medium enterprises, but academia and other institutions are taking on more and more of that role. So I'm not going to go through this line item, but it gives you an idea of what might be available in what we call basic R&D. Next slide. And then when you get into corporate tasks, which are much more generic to what people have to do is in the background to the core thing, which is developing drugs, etc. And Melanie can talk to this, I'm sure, much more than I can, but effectively there is some aspect of that in all of the, shall we say, the silos. And now you can see that the virtual companies and the generic companies are much more intensively organized in that. Third slide. Then finally, what we talk about is the transition into man, and all the way through to registration. And then we have the commercial, marketing, sales, and all the various attached pieces to that. And by and large, and I'm not saying this is exclusively, academia really doesn't have much to do with that, except they are sometimes brought in to do specialist analytics or something of that nature. But the big pharma, obviously the SMEs and the contract houses all get into that. Generics may or may not need to. And at the moment, so the jury is out on virtual. So if anybody who is starting their career wants to know the sort of things that you can get into, then these three slides may be of some assistance. Okay, let's get into the meat of this, shall we? Next slide, please. So, as I said in my rambling, most of the training in the past happened within the sector itself. So big pharma, we had training companies, and academia handled the rest. And the issue is, as I say, is that continuous professional development is an absolute requirement, but that environment is now somewhat fragmented, and the environment itself is evolving at a stupendous rate. So we need to box clever with this and stop thinking in silos and think about how do we merge all of the various elements into a cohesive whole. Next slide. So I'm going to, if we can drop off the slides for a second, I will come back to this slide in a sec and on. So if we can go back to the talking heads, thank you. I'll start getting into the Q&A. So effectively, big pharma, training companies, academia, and learned bodies, which I'll talk about when we get to that section of the areas that perhaps we can think about what happened in the past. But the question I'm going to ask are quite straightforward. Assuming everyone accepts training is necessary, what is continuous professional development and why is it vital? And I'm going to ask Jackie that first off, because she's right in the mix of this particular question. So Jackie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. So I think we think of it in terms of not necessarily continuous professional development, but lifelong learning is the sort of phrase that we're using these days. And I think you're absolutely right, because part of the challenge that we have is that you can no longer take the time to develop, sort of massively extensive training courses. By the time you've done it and rolled it out, it's probably already out of date. And so, the sort of approaches that we're thinking about and taking, not just actually for early careers, but for the whole staff across the enterprise, is really a whole mix of sort of learning on the job, development opportunities, and giving people access to a wide range of digital learning as well, which is curated for, departments and job roles. So I think for us, it's a whole mix. And I think it recognises and acknowledges as well that technology moves very fast. So, new things are coming online all the time. And the people that really adapt and survive best are those that can, apply themselves in a multidisciplinary way, not necessarily just be experts at one thing and one area anymore.
Thank you. Melanie, do you need anything? Do you have anything to add to that? I've got a specific question for Renos, which I'll get to, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I just echo really what Jackie said. I like the lifelong learning terminology. Feels a bit more contemporary and rather more relevant. But yeah, really it's about, or certainly my exposure to it, it's really about what enables people to sort of adapt to change, really, in a positive way. So changes in the working environment, changes in the industry. And the things now, it's so accessible. Traditionally, way back when in my career, it was a case of traditional face-to-face classroom style learning, and there's very much still a place for that, and I very much enjoy doing it. But there are so many other avenues to learning now and enhancing one's skills. The online, I'm sure we'll come on to that sort of bit later on, but it's all about just fostering that sort of healthy learning culture, isn't it? And help really people, and this sounds a bit cheesy, be the best that they can be in the workplace. And just being on this sort of continuum and not really standing still. So very much in favour. It is vital.
Okay, that's unequivocal. Renos, something you said to me earlier, and I think this is to a degree about motivation. Given the training is necessary, what motivates the individual and what makes the employer respond to that motivation in the context of you getting the training?
Sure. I think that CPD is often seen as something that the employer lays on for an employee, but I agree with our colleagues earlier that actually what it really is a lifelong learning thing. I think to a great extent it's up to an individual to keep on asking themselves, what do I lack that I could bring? Where's the value add for me? And therefore, where's the value add for my current or prospective employer in me pursuing certain types of continuing professional development? So I think we need to check in with ourselves as much as anything about what is it that we could make more of ourselves if only we could do it. And that's very role dependent, and that's been said. So I think that's my answer there. How do you add value to yourself and your future employment prospects?
Philosophically, do you, and I'm opening this up to anybody who wants to put that in, is this something that a new employee or prospective employee really needs to check out thoroughly when they're thinking of joining an organization, that there are going to be opportunities for growth? And Jackie, you can probably talk to this immediately. are you seeing that from the new generations? Is that they know what they want and where they? No, I don't mean in a, they want to be the CEO of AstraZeneca in 5 years. I mean, although I'm sure there was one or two who come with talking about that. But do you see that they understand that they need growth?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I think they challenge the rest of the organization sometimes with that expectation and ambition, because I think we see it particularly in the graduate program, where people come in and they definitely expect to get a wider range of experience more quickly, and I think they expect to progress through the organization, certainly early on, much faster than perhaps
we did.
Yes.
And I'm going to touch on that later, but finish your thoughts. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been a point of discussion recently as we evolve our graduate program approach, because we've had a fantastic lab-based graduate program for quite a number of years, and there's been very much a view of it was for lab-based scientists to give them that practical, hands-on, project-based experience. But we're now sort of having the discussion, but hang on a minute, isn't it good to give them experience in clinical research and entrepreneurship, and do we put them in the BioHub? And those discussions now are actively happening, and actually we are doing some of their rotations now will go into some of those other areas of the business that you described as corporate earlier. But actually those are the kind of things now that they're going to need to see a cross section of the business, and actually some of our best leaders are the ones that have worked across many different areas.
Absolutely. I think if I can sum that up, it's we really do need to think beyond the silo.
Yeah.
For everybody who has the attitude and the aptitude, and sometimes you have to show them what that means.
Yeah.
Rather than just saying, I want you to go into Salesforce for a year, and they all throw their hands up in horror because they've only been sitting on a lab stool for the last 2 years. I've been there, believe me. Okay, so I put here, who should do it? Well, everyone, duh. But where should we do it? How should we do it? And Jackie, you've alluded to what I think is frankly exemplary in what AZ is doing. I'll say that unequivocally, because there are other big farmers, shall we say, not a million miles from where we sit, that have paid lip service but haven't actually delivered. So do you think that there is, and I think it was Melanie who said the mix approach is going to be essential, and does AstraZeneca agree with that?
When you say the mix approach,
well, because it's not just what AstraZeneca is doing; it's how they engage with other organisations outside AstraZeneca who have either the skill sets or, I'm sure you put some of your brightest into, say, biotechs that you are partnering with, for instance, as a taster for what that's all about. Presupposing that, but it is about the where we get the training out. And I hear what you said about having curated schemes which allow you to do things which are not planned in-house. But are you saying that nothing is off limits in that? If a newbie, I hate that term, somebody at the start of their career, Zoe, came to you with a game plan, would that be looked at positively, even if it doesn't fit within your normal thinking?
I think it would be looked at positively. I mean, in reality, whether we can fully accommodate it is a completely different discussion, of course, because there are practical constraints, and actually having sort of very individualized approaches is often quite challenging. But I think, for talented individuals, the ability to move around the business and get different experiences there, not just within things like the formal grad program, but actually, even thinking about staff generally. We have something called Development Marketplace, which is, anybody can post effectively secondment opportunities for people to go and get experience in a different department for up to 6 months. And there's a sort of unwritten rule that those kind of, they're not restricted. If you can accommodate them, you do, and you should. So those kind of things, I think, are fantastic. The other thing that you touched on was kind of giving people experience actually in different organizations and using that as a sort of training route. And I think one of the things that, of course, is being actively explored at the moment by government in the apprenticeship framework is having apprenticeships where you do exactly that. You have apprentices that are able to move around, so that, because one of the barriers, of course, to uptake, particularly for smaller companies at the moment, is they can't shoulder the full burden. But if you could have apprenticeships where people spend perhaps a bit of time in an SME and a bit of time in big pharma, that I think starts to look very attractive. It's a bit complicated the way things are structured at the moment, but I think it's going to come.
Okay, that's new to me, and so thank you for that. I'm going to get a bit into the weeds now, and this, I was going to say the $64,000 question, and it is literally the $64,000 question. Who should pay for this? And Zoe, because you're new in this, any thoughts on that?
What do you mean in terms of who should pay for what?
Well,
exactly?
Some of these things are really quite expensive. And it's hopefully we don't follow the American model where it's the learner who borrows money to get trained. Yeah. But from your perspective, do you think, to use an Americanism, the skin in the game is an issue? Because, and I'm thinking particularly of apprenticeships, as Jacqueline alluded to, 30, 40 years ago, the big companies who were doing apprenticeships were actually funding the training for other organizations who would steal the apprentices as soon as they got their training. Now, that's unfair, but on the other hand, it's also unfair for people like yourself, Zoe, to shoulder that burden. So the question is, how do you address the relative responsibility in your view? And don't say everybody should pay but me.
Well, I would say because for the internship that I completed at Costello, I was paid for it as a kind of normal employee. Well, I mean, my rate wasn't as high, but I was still paid. And I think if it wasn't for that, I definitely wouldn't have applied for it, because obviously you see a lot of unpaid internships things these days, which isn't fair, and it does put graduates, especially who don't have very much money and can't afford to, Indeed. It's not fair for them to kind of undertake internships where they're trying to get experience but not being paid for it. So I think in the long run, although there's a kind of risk if companies are investing in interns, because you never know what might happen, they might not be suitable for the company. But from my perspective and from Costello's perspective, I think the internship program is actually very, very successful. And we do have a lot of interns that then go on to get permanent roles at the company because we're kind of thrown right into it, and we're on projects straight away. We're in different divisions. We get loads of different experience in different departments, different disease areas, different clients. We're doing exactly the same work as a permanent employee would do. And although, again, that might seem a bit unfair because we're paid less, what it does show is that we're kind of learning on the job, so that when we decide to go into a permanent role, we already know which areas we're interested in, and we know where we see ourselves fit best. So when I applied, I knew where my values would be best placed in the company, which in the long run is better for the company because they've invested that time into working out where someone's best place, if you see what I mean. So I think it's a bit of a risk, but I think it pays off in the end to invest in interns.
In fact, you very neatly answered the question I was going to ask right at the end. That's fine. This is a dynamic discussion, and that actually, I think, very succinctly put the case for internships and apprenticeships in the round. With respect to the companies, this brings to the other elements in terms of that return on investment. And I'm going to ask Melanie first. How do we quantify that?
Oh, with difficulty, the return on investment.
Yeah.
You know, rather than, I might sort of approach this from a slightly different angle, because in terms of the return on investment, there are ways, certainly given my work area, where you can secure as best as you can the return on investment. So for instance, it's a heavy investment, you know, to train somebody up. I mean, if we take our own trainees, for instance, it's tens of thousands, put them through law school, they come in, they learn on the job, which is the invaluable experience. But they're still, to a degree, a cost to the business. So we're investing in these people. Now, we don't necessarily do it here, but I help a lot of organisations who will make sure that they are protected so that they do get the return. And once, and this is your point earlier, Paul, about years ago when apprentices were fully trained up and then they were pinched to go somewhere else. And the recipient of all of that great training had actually invested nothing and had no sort of skin in the game. So drafting up agreements for clawback of sort of training costs and things like that is something that I do get involved in from time to time. Sometimes employers use it maybe as more of a sort of a deterrent rather than really going through the full sort of enforcement process. But I think it's a way of sort of managing expectations and saying to, you know, the learner, we want to invest in you actually for the longer term. We want a longer term relationship here. So I'm very happy to invest in you, but please stay, because we actually do want something, you know, we do want the return on investment. And a lot of the time, you know, people do tend to stay. If they have a good learning experience, then, you know, you engender that loyalty, the commitment, and it works well.
It actually slots neatly into something you said to me, Renos, about the value added, but the intent for retention. And I think there's it's not necessarily in a legalistic term, Melanie, but a program that actually shows people the value of an organization and they're comfortable with it. It's a way of, you know, testing the waters, and then the retention, if the people are good, and obviously Zoe, you were one of those, to allow companies to see that ROI on an internship. But when you're looking at, and I can talk about a number of ex-colleagues who did higher degrees on the back of help from their organization, and within, you know, literally months of going, they were off to another organization, which okay, the company may have got their added value during that training, but I doubt it very much. And I do actually welcome, Melanie, what you said about the having factor that into agreements, either for internship or in terms of employment, is that it's not a freebie, as it were. Okay.
Paul, can I just sure. Add on that, just to take that a slightly different stance on that, because I don't think, even if they leave, I don't think that's, certainly in the science context, I don't think that's necessarily a negative. And actually, one of the reasons that my job exists and we do what we do is also to build the wider scientific environment, because we know that some of those placement students and some of those graduates will spend 12 months, 2 years with us, and then they'll go off and do other things. Maybe they'll go off PhD. They often come back to us later on, and there's that kind of, you know, fluidity between industry and academia and between companies that actually is quite healthy. So, you know, that's not all bad news. What we're not very good at, and we're working hard at, is tracking them, so we know where they go and what they do. And I'm going to pause now because Renos is desperate to say something.
Yeah, Renos, go for it.
I want to echo very loudly what you've just said, actually, but I also wanted to say, usually these kind of training opportunities, if they're paid for by the employer. They're paid for in different ways. Sometimes it is a cost, and we heard that it can cost tens of thousands, but sometimes it's a deeper kind of investment of the sort that you're saying. And I think if we look at it from a slightly different perspective, perhaps we've got too much of a card table mentality that, no, these are my cards.
Yeah, it shouldn't be transactional.
You play cards, you get cards back, right?
Yeah.
So you're benefiting from somebody else's investment in the game. So, you've trained people, other people train people, and we do have a kind of a roundabout of talent. And I think what's important is to realize what we really want to do is to bring in experience from outside to teach us as much as we teach.
Yeah.
Because, otherwise we end up with a groupthink cycle, and that's a downward spiral, in my opinion.
I do actually completely agree with what's just been said, and indeed we talk about the ecosystem, and historically the ecosystem has always operated on the basis that it's a holistic set of skills, and people dip in and out, and it's relatively easy if you're, say, in the Cambridge London axis, that you have this churn, and it's great for companies, etc., etc. It's a little bit more difficult as I'm dealing with a group in Finland, and first of all, they can't attract people, and the people they train bugger off to US as quickly as they possibly can, and that becomes an issue for them. But it's not all one size fits all scenario, and I do believe the shall we say the carousel idea has genuine merit, and I'm with you on this one, Jackie. Tracking them is an issue, and as long as they leave understanding that they can come back, because sometimes exit interviews can be a little fraught, and they shouldn't be seen in that view. If people go and you say go out, learn 2.5-3 years later, if you want to come back, the door is always open. Shows that you value them and that you're more likely to get them back. But then again, you'll be taking people from other organizations. That's why my old job as a headhunter was so very good for me, because I was good at it, digging people out of companies like AstraZeneca and putting a few people in as well. So it did work both ways. So I'm going away from the, let's pull up those poll results, please, Alicia. Okay, that's the one. Okay, so it's a relatively small poll, and it's obviously we think that most of the people who've responded to this are employers. But what I found interesting was that the cost to the company of work-based learning is a fraction of the issue about capacity at the employer to supervise. And I fully recognize this. So, Jackie, from your perspective, is your line teams being so very busy a real barrier for supervising growth of people in the organization?
I think it is, but I think the other thing that is constraining us as well at the moment, frankly, is space, particularly if we're thinking of lab-based roles. And for us, that was a challenge even before COVID. It's obviously much more acute now. So it's literally, sort of having lab space to put people. The flip side of that, though, is that for non-lab-based roles, I think one of the things the pandemic has completely taught us is, for other work that can be done that's office-based, the world has suddenly opened up massively with virtual working. And, a lot of our sort of data science, AI opportunities, for example, now can be done remotely. So, it's kind of a little bit, there's pros and cons, I think. We are definitely, I think, constrained a little bit for some of the lab-based roles, but less so for the others.
Okay, and Melanie, does that reflect your own experience, or?
In part, I mean, I suppose the thing about sort of office-based and sort of virtual learning, I mean, a lot of what we do, it's relationships. It's all about relationships and sort of human connection. So for us, the virtual thing definitely has its place. But the largest barrier, I would definitely agree, is this supervision capacity at the employer. Because in order to make a learning experience sort of fulfilling, meaningful, effective, you know, I've certainly seen, I'm sure it's true for so many of us, we are always working at capacity, if not over capacity. We don't have additional hours where we can, you know, spend that time mentoring, supervising. We'd all love to, I'm sure, because I'm sure we all see the value in it. But I think that is a real problem, is the way that people work these days. And actually with the pandemic, I don't know about you, Jackie, but one thing that it's definitely taught us is that start and end to the working day has just crept and crept and crept. So to the point there is no real start and end. It's just one continuous cycle for a lot of people.
Yeah, 24/7.
I agree. And I also think one of the ways it plays out for us is that the preference would be to have longer placements rather than, we don't do many short, certainly for lab-based roles, we don't have short placements. They tend to be the 12-month industrial placements, because by the time you get people trained and ready and up, you know, 3 months disappears and they've hardly done anything. So, you know, for those kind of roles, definitely longer placements are preferable.
Okay, I'm going to ask Zoe on this, and please be brief, we are running out of time, Zoe. For you, was supervision there? Was it an issue? Did you feel that you got enough?
Yeah, I definitely got enough supervision, because I think the way we work at my company is they're almost anticipating that interns will stay on. And so I think they take the approach of they want people to be supervised as much as possible, because they want interns to get the training so that they can be brought up to speed as quickly as possible, so they can then do the job that permanent staff do. So I've had a line manager from the start. Even as an intern, I've got the same line manager now, and so I was able to develop that relationship with her right from the start, and I'm still with her now. And so I've now developed that kind of relationship with her and other colleagues, and I was always treated as a permanent member. Really, I wasn't ever treated any differently just because I was an intern, which I think was really valuable for the way I viewed myself and my work as well. So I think from my perspective, it's 100% worth people investing in little interns because it just gives you a lot of confidence and makes you feel very supported, and as though you've got a good shot at staying with the company if you'd like to.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to dwell on the new technologies because I think most of us are now really quite au fait with what that things like we have today can do to giving people access to ideas and training, etc., readily. The only question I have, and this will go to all of you, but Renos, you may want to start on this. Is remote learning as valuable as face-to-face?
So yes, I believe it is, but I believe it is in the context of the learner, the provision, and what it is you're trying to teach. And I think we've touched on the fact that certain types of workplace learning need an environment. You know, you can't do workplace learning in a lab unless you have a lab. However, you know, if we go beyond those obvious things like being mentored, having a one-to-one with your supervisor during an internship, those kind of things, they work surprisingly well. You can build meaningful personal rapport even through your camera. It's weird looking at your camera, and I know some people don't get on with it intuitively, but I think if we can move beyond that, there are so many things you can do remotely, and teaching people academic facts, or putting over a presentation to people about, you know, background information that they need to get insights. That all works really well online, as far as I can tell.
Okay, and actually segueing slightly to something that Melanie mentioned when we were just doing the prep for this, it's FDF. One of the things that you learn when you're embedded in the corporate culture is the, shall we say, the softer skill set. And I know that's important to, from what Melanie was saying. So we're talking, this is very judgmental here, the office politics, which obviously never happens in AstraZeneca, does it, Jackie? And then there's the, you know, the commercial judgment, the idea of team is difficult to engender remotely, but also, I suppose the technologies help with things like diversity, because you can integrate a global team much more easily in this sort of media. But then you get the cultural elements of differences, and how do you deal with tolerance and keeping an open mind, and you know, British slightly off-color jokes going down like a lead balloon in certain parts of Far Eastern culture. I'm not saying that's happened to me, but you know what I'm saying. So in that sense, Melanie, do you think the technologies actually help, hinder?
Yeah, I think they do help, actually. They do help because it just offers another way. Verona's made a good point. It's about, you know, how people learn well, because people learn well in different kind of ways. You know, some people enjoy the live classroom setting, the debate, the discussion, face to face, whereas others like to maybe sort of ruminate a bit more reflective. And so there are sort of online tools. I've seen a lot, actually, especially in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion type training, where you can do it. You can capture such a wide audience there across an organisation, where people can fit it into their day. You can monitor, you can track it as an organisation that's being completed. So there is definitely a really good place, I think, for sort of the online learning. And especially, I mean, some of the training topics we get asked to cover are incredibly divisive and sensitive and emotive. So it's quite a tricky landscape to navigate, actually. But I'd say organisations that I support in this particular sector are at the front, I would say, in terms of what they're investing in that kind of training. And I participate regularly in a lot of sort of management development training as part of sort of an annual programme where I teach the employment law module. So there's a lot of good stuff happening out there, online and face to face. It's a live session that I do, but last year it was all virtual, so difficult to get a captive audience virtually, I would say, but it's doable.
Okay. Because I know we're short on time, and there is a bit I want to get to. If anybody wants to chip in on that last bit, can you make it very, very short? Because I want to talk about mentorship, because I think it's a key element of how we develop and train people. So anybody, any other thoughts on that, or shall I go on to mentorship? All right, mentorship it is. So I suppose, and this goes to something that Zoe said right at the beginning about how do we, and others, about how do we empower the inexperienced, and in terms of in-house, but perhaps even out-house mentoring. What does that even mean? Jackie, Renos, Melanie, do you want to chip in on that? And I'll go back to Zoe in a second.
Yeah, we do quite a lot of mentoring, both internally but also externally as well. So at the moment, for example, my team are working with Career Ready, which is an external charity that basically work with sixth formers and get them ready for the world of work. And part of that involves, and we generally find, you know, people are really happy and want to, you know, mentor and share their experience with other people. It's generally not a great challenge. You know, we've got a big raft of STEM ambassadors, and actually we try and get the apprentices involved in a lot of this as much as possible, because they're actually great at sort of, there's less of an age gap. So I think, a lot of the students relate really well to that. Yeah, I do think it's really important.
And just to put it in context of industry, and most of you will probably know that One Nucleus has instituted a mentorship program and dumped 4 of them on me, just for the record, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. It has to be said, and it goes to what you're saying, Melanie, about diversity. I mean, one of them comes from Western China, so she's teaching me a lot. Never mind me giving her some guidance and things. So that's cool. But in the workplace, how do employers give them responsibility beyond what they know already? And how do they also empower themselves? And I'm sure this is something that you come across, Zoe, about I can do that. Is it incumbent on people like you to say, I can do that, as well as people from on high saying, I want you to try this something which is very scary?
I think initially I found that I didn't have very much confidence going into the workplace for the first time. And so it's really helpful when project managers and line managers ask you to do things that you don't think you can do yourself. So if they say, please, can you do this? And you think, oh, actually, I can do that, but I wouldn't have stepped forward if they hadn't have asked me to. So I think it's being given the confidence by being asked to do things and being given that responsibility makes you realize you can do things. So then next time you'll suggest it yourself first, as opposed to being asked again, if you see what I mean. So I think that's definitely something that's given me confidence as I've started out. It's just by people coming to me and asking me to do things where I maybe didn't think I was qualified to. And I think, like I was saying, with having like a line manager from the start, that kind of put me in the right mindset and made me feel like I was a permanent member of the company from the start, because I was treated completely equally. I think it's when placement students and interns are kind of treated a bit inexperienced that maybe that's where it goes a bit wrong. Whereas when you treat them equally and the same and give them the same opportunities and the same, you can participate in all the extracurricular stuff in the same way a permanent member can, then it just gives you more confidence to kind of put yourself out there and feel as though you're a valued member as well. I
think that actually quite insightful. Thank you, Zoe, because no, seriously, I mean, it reflects some of the things we've been doing with some of our staff who one of my closest colleagues, who's Alicia knows very well, came from a completely non-scientific background. And, we are a very science-driven organization, and now she's essentially runs the marketing department. From a grounding which you would never have thought would be possible. She came in as a temp, as essentially a gopher, and we gave her the opportunity to shine. And by God, has she run with it! And I think that's something we sometimes miss, that we don't allow people to do that shining. And going to the other guys, obviously, I mean, you'll have seen some of this yourself, and Renos mentioned that students themselves are picking up that mentorship piece. You mentioned STEM, Jacqueline, but he mentioned a science entrepreneur club, which students and entrepreneurs are playing with. One Nucleus is doing this. The Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine have been doing it for 20 years and are expanding into other arenas. By the way, our illustrious leader is now the president-elect of the FPM, so I've got to puff that up, obviously. So it is about empowerment, but it also requires some oversight and mentorship, and we've addressed that. I'm conscious that we've only got 5 minutes left. Before I go on to any other questions that I've got, Alicia, are there any burning questions from the audience that we should...
There's a couple of questions. Thanks for reserving time there. So the first one...
Jackie's got something to say as well.
No, I was just going to volunteer to take the first question.
Please do, Jackie, go ahead. Thank you. Yeah.
Is it the one that you were going to share, Alicia? Is it the one about, is there any data to suggest that? Yes. So this is there any data to suggest that graduates, PhD students who've not had a placement or internship perform any less well over time? And I think the resounding answer to that is yes. I mean, that obviously depends on the placement. I'm not talking about sort of a 2-week placement here, which probably doesn't make a lot of difference, but certainly our experience is that when, you know, for example, the industrial placement students who come in and spend a year with us as part of their undergraduate degree are transformed at the end of that year in terms of their level of maturity of approach. You know, they've spent a year working on real science in projects, and it's you know, they are very, very different. And a number of those ultimately will come back to us later on, quite often after they've done a PhD. And the other thing I would sort of call out is that, you know, we have over the years, so certainly people that come in who perhaps have not had that, you know, we've tended to spend a lot of time training on things like teamwork, communication, sometimes presentation skills as well. It's those kinds of elements that I think, you know, having a good grounded placement or you know, sort of early talent experience, those are the things I think that it can really build and benefit from. And actually people that come into our centrally run programs do, you know, we are trying now to tag them and look and follow them through to see how, because we expect them to move faster through the organization.
Okay, so you actually tag people effectively, Jackie, from the outset? Yeah,
we're just starting to do that now.
Okay. Panos, sorry, Renos.
Yeah, I wanted to follow on. I think that actually flows very nicely from where you left off, Paul, and also touches on the second question. I think that there's an element of people who pursue internship or other kinds of shadowing or placements, even short ones, are the kind of people who are looking to add skills. It comes right back to the start of our conversation today with CPD. I think that what maybe is going on is that if we can bring this to the awareness of those who don't naturally gravitate towards it, it does improve their prospects for all the reasons that you set out there, Jacqueline. So I think it's sort of self-fulfilling in some ways. If you present people with this, they can benefit.
Okay. Melanie, any thoughts on any of those? I mean, there was another question.
Sorry,
here.
I couldn't unmute quick, but very, very quickly. I'm interested in Isla's question actually about sort of the more informal, less structured, a week, 2 weeks of shadowing. I'm all for that, but what I have found, because it's unstructured, it tends to be the FD calling you up to say, my daughter's in the 6th form and she'd like a couple of weeks work experience, can you manage it? And then you get into sort of inclusion type, sort of access to opportunity type issues, which is probably another session entirely. But so I like the idea of less structured, more informal shadowing opportunities, but like I say, I think that's probably a conversation for another day.
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time. I think this is something that could go on for the next 35 minutes, Alicia, but you know, tempus fugit. So to you.
Thank you very much indeed to all of the panel for your time and the discussion this afternoon. That was really engaging and informative. Some key questions answered there. So looking at the data that we collected before, I think we've answered the question that yes, supervision is important, but you've also highlighted and explored some other areas such as focusing on soft skills or people skills, which we've most recently coined the term in One Nucleus, people skills, sort of building on those, and then the importance of mentorship and how that ties into confidence. So yeah, a lot of really valuable insights there. So I'd just like to thank the panel again for their time, and I'd like to thank the attendees as well for joining us, and I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation, and we look forward to seeing you future webinars, but also do check the One Nucleus website, because we are resuming some of our face-to-face meetings as well. Very exciting. So yeah, do go have a look at the event listings and see what's there. And with that, I wish you all a good afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, guys. And thank you to the panelists, particularly for your input.
Thank you.